Okay, well, howdy, and good morning. And welcome to the GEAC meeting. I'm Karen Butler-Purdy from Texas A&M University. And I guess we're happy to welcome several new members. We will start by going around and introducing ourselves. So maybe we can start to the far left.
Good morning. I'm Kara McCaleb, and I'm the Interim Dean for the College of Graduate Studies at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi.
Good morning. I'm Blanca Bauer. I'm the Assistant VP for Academic Assessment and Effectiveness at UT Health San Antonio.
I'm Richard Berry, Professor of Music at Stephen F. Austin State University.
Good morning. John Seigan, University of Texas San Antonio, Interim Dean for Graduate School, also Senior Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives and Institutional Effectiveness.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Jennifer Nalos. I'm a Program Director here at the Coordinating Board.
Andrea Gualado, Dean of the Graduate College at Texas State University and Vice Chair of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Goman, and I'm the other CB staff liaison to this committee.
Good morning. I'm Bill Harn. I'm Dean of Graduate Studies at Lamar University.
Hello, I'm Ken Hendrickson. I'm Dean of the Graduate School at Sam Houston State.
Joseph Opong, Associate Dean in the Graduate School, North Texas.
Good morning. My name is Tom Krieger. I'm Professor of Finance and Chair of the Accounting and Finance Department, Texas A&M, Kingsville.
Good morning. I'm Raymond Jackson. I'm the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at the University of Texas at Arlington.
Good morning. I'm Barry Lambert, Dean of the College of Graduate Studies at Tarleton State University.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Larson. I'm the Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Houston.
Good morning. Kathy Matthew, Associate Vice President in Academic Affairs, University of Houston, Clear Lake.
Dean Nykirk, Associate Dean in the Graduate School, University of Texas at Austin.
Good morning, Rajkumar Lakshmanaswamy, in short Raj, from Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center in El Paso.
Cynthia Rutledge, Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs, Curriculum and Instruction, and Faculty Development at McMurray University.
Jennifer Schrader, Associate Dean of the Graduate School at Texas A&M Commerce.
Mark Sheridan, Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School at Texas Tech University.
Sarah Lynn McKinnon-Crowley, Student Representative. I'm a graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin.
Andrew Zinn, I'm Dean of the Graduate School at UT Southwestern Medical Center.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stacy Silverman, Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Division of Academic Quality and Workforce here at the Coordinating Board, and welcome. We're so glad that you're here today. Thank you.
I think we have one more person.
Hello, I'm Devanna Fulton, Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Houston downtown.
Okay, well, thank you all. So I think the next item on our agenda is to just go over a few things related to the meeting proceedings. Well, we don't have anyone on the phone, so I won't go over that. But in terms of speaking, so press your microphone button when you want to speak, and then if you can turn it off when you finish. Also, I think we're collecting lunch money for those of you who have not turned in your envelope if you ordered lunch today. In terms of action items, so if there are action items, then they require a motion and then a second and a vote. And discussion items don't require an action. And then lastly, I guess that surveys will be sent out following the meeting to ascertain travel and cost information. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little more about that.
So usually after each GEAC meeting, we'll send out some summary notes and possible action items. And one of those is getting an estimate or as accurate as possible of your expenditures and costs related to participating. This is compiled and put into our annual reporting, which Dr. Galato will talk about a little bit later. But it gives us a good idea of what the costs in time and university and campus resources are for your participation as a member of this committee. And so we'll receive a link to fill that out following the meeting.
Yeah, just so you know, this isn't particular to you. This is a standard part of the government code, and we do this for all of our external advisory committees.
Okay, anything else you guys want to mention? James? Nope. Okay, so you will notice that today's agenda is really full of discussion items. And we will kind of try to time it so that we can go through the different items. We may end up deciding to table some items if, the discussion is really rich. And so we'll sort of see how we go. I think it's been a while since we had such a long list of discussion items. So I think that's good. Okay, so the next item is, I guess, to look at the summary notes from the May 16th, 2018 meeting. And so I guess those of you who were present back in May, hopefully you had an opportunity to review the summary notes. And I guess at this point, I will entertain any corrections. If not, then I'll entertain a motion to accept the summary notes.
So moved.
Okay, so moved and seconded, and I guess all those in favor of accepting the summary notes, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, so next we will move on to an update. Andrea will talk about the presentation that she made on behalf of GEAC to the Committee on Academic Workforce and Success.
So I went to the committee meeting last week, actually, and the presentation is actually very brief. It's a maximum 5-minute presentation of a summary of the activities of the Graduate Advisory Committee. So I reported that the committee worked on elements related to the marketable skills, that we had a discussion about those, that we discussed the 18 characteristics, which are now the just characteristics of doctoral programs. And then I gave the briefest of summaries of the draft strategic plan that this committee has been working on. There were no questions from the committee, no objections, and the report was happily accepted, and I went on my merry way back home. So.
Okay, thank you. And so if you have the opportunity, if you did not last night, you might look at this summary because it does sort of tell you kind of what we were focused on last year. And then if you have interest, you can go back and look at the archive videos from that particular meeting. Next, as Andrea mentioned, we spent a lot of time last year providing input and working with the staff on the strategic plan. And so James and Jen are going to give us an update on that.
I thought let's begin with, especially for you newer folks, and also a reminder for the rest of us, how we got where we are. So the agency updated and developed a new strategic plan for higher education generally. That's the 60 by 30 text plan. And it was decided that accordingly we should look at developing a strategic plan specifically for graduate education in the state. The 60 by 30 text plan has elements that address graduate education, but as is not probably, I would imagine not surprising, a lot of it focuses on undergraduate education. Undergraduate students form by far the largest segment of higher education in Texas. So GEAC seemed like the correct body to work with board staff to develop a strategic plan. Before we got started, though, the agency hired the RAND Corporation to do a study and basically to lay out some basic facts about graduate education. They went around the state and they did some focused sort of sample interviews with institutions and with programs. They sampled a few significant programs in the state, looked at certain disciplines. They also took a good look at some data from other states. So in the RAND report, there are some areas where we look at how, the usual sorts of comparisons, how does Texas stack up against the 10 most populous states, especially, you see a number of charts in the RAND report where we're comparing ourselves to New York and California and Florida and the other large states with significant higher education systems. Out of that RAND report, a number of recommendations and findings were developed, and the idea was that the strategic plan would draw upon that base of information, findings, and recommendations as a starting point for our strategic plan. So the RAND report having been completed, the decision was made that the best way to approach this would be first to discuss the item generally with the committee, and there were some committee of the whole discussions of the plan, what elements might be constituted in the plan. And the first thing we started doing was developing an outline, and the GEAC committee designated a subcommittee of, I think it was usually 7 individuals, to work with us, including our current chair and vice chair, a number of other committee members participating. And basically that smaller group then worked with staff, primarily myself and Jen, to first develop an outline. Just sort of an outline and try to figure out what are the major topics that we should address. We shared the outline kind of on a recursive basis with both the subcommittee discussed it, and then we'd share it with the committee of the whole. And out of that, we developed an outline that everyone seemed pretty happy with, and then we started drilling down further. The staff, Jen and myself, would periodically organize phone conferences, and the subcommittee members would call in, and we'd discuss, and we'd flesh out using basically an online documentation system. We'd fill out more of the plan. When we had opportunity, we would also meet after GEAC meetings, and we'd get take that opportunity to meet face to face. Once we had a plan, then we shared that internally. Jen and I, we went over it with our division leadership and got some feedback from them. Then the next step was then we took a good close look at the way we developed the plan, and we enlisted some other board staff members. We wanted to try to find more documentation and support for some of the recommendations and statements of fact that we were making. So we've done some research in higher education literature, again, looking at other states, looking at some published papers, and that leads us to the form that the plan is in now. It's much more now of a finished finished draft, not a final draft, but a finished draft. And our plan moving forward is to get some feedback from the committee, to get further feedback from internal stakeholders here in the agency, and eventually to put it out for public comment. Jen, would you like to take over from here?
Okay. So thank you for the history of the development of the plan, and to the subcommittee members and the staff that helped further develop it and bring it into the sort of state that it's in right now. Following the meeting today, I'll send a Word version to you all so that you can enter in comments where you'd like. But some of the feedback stage that we're at right now are if you have ideas of additional evidence or information that would strengthen the target strategies and goals or measures within there, information that is supporting or specific copy editing things that are in there, sort of the challenge of being working on it very closely is that we need everyone else's perspective to catch those items, or to further strengthen the different targets, measures, and goals that are included. We're going to try to wrap that period up by the end of this month so that we can move it to the next stage of feedback and review and comment. So I'll be sending that out with our summary of today's meeting as the Word version of this, and then you can send your comments, feedback, supporting articles or evidence or links back to me, and I'll sort of I will facilitate that communication with the plan. There's a lot of information in here, so I definitely, if we want to have any questions or some brief discussion now, but I think that it's something that many of you might want to sit and read and then bring questions or comments forward. And on the front of that agenda item in the packet are the subcommittee members that helped in those subcommittee meetings. And so as you all return to your institutions, they have a lot of depth on the dialogue and discussions as well. If you want to, I guess I'm volunteering, if you'd like to reach out to them as well to sort of see how this plan came into the state it's in today.
So a couple of final points. Again, the next steps are you to give us a little bit of feedback give us your feedback this month, then to take it forward to the leadership of our agency. Then we'll put it out for public comment, and then the final step would be consideration by the board. I think we're aiming for the January board meeting. One other final note, especially for you newer folks, this is all new to you, so your fresh eyes are going to be particularly valuable to us. But I do want to kind of gently point out where we are in the process. We're quite far along. This is a completed draft, so if you have a brilliant idea for renaming and reordering all 4 of our priority areas, I'm sorry, we're just not at a place to hear that right now, because since we're trying to wrap things up. What we're really focusing on is trying to polish this draft and try to make it the best that it can be. So please just keep that in mind as you develop your comments and feedback for us. Thank you.
Maybe a couple of comments in that regard. The committee tried very hard to have it, the plan not to be too narrow so that it would fit the variety of institutions that we have in the state, with an understanding that each of these priority areas might take a different shape on each of the campuses. But at the same time, we also didn't want to be too generic so that this would become meaningless. So we focused on 4 main priority areas, and then with each of them, there are a number of goals that are associated with those priority areas, and then some ways of measuring progress. So that's kind of the basic structure. But again, the committee kind of felt that there was enough flexibility for the different institutions that we have in the state.
I have a question. Since I'm new, so I may maybe ask just a few. So the connection of this to 60/30 and the reporting back, so there's going to be a reporting between the institutions and the Higher Education Coordinating Board, a reporting mechanism?
No, not for this plan. Yes, there are reporting mechanisms related to 60/30 techs, but this plan does not feature that level of reporting in detail. Really, this is more of a plan to provide some guidance to institutions about actions that institutions can take and the state as a whole can take to encourage graduate education to flourish, to try to get a vision for where we'll be in the next 5 or 10 years, to look at some significant priority areas that we'd like that institutions and programs should be paying attention to.
Because I think this is a very crisp, very focused plan. With our new president, UTSA, we went through a strategic initiatives framework and model, and just looking at this, I can say 100% of what I see in here, we already have identified strategies and key performance indicators, and it's like a miracle document. I mean, it's So it's a compliment to the committee and everybody who contributed. So thank you.
Right. Well, that's happy. We're happy to hear that. I think the subcommittee, the idea was to have a broad representation on that group, and so it's good to hear that perhaps we hit on the things that people are already thinking about. So, okay. Any other? Yes, please.
Looking at the strategic plan, you said there were goals and outcome metrics for that you want to measure. Is there a timeline as well associated with it?
Yes, we envision this plan to basically to take us through 2030, which coincides, roughly speaking, with the 60 by 30 text plan.
Just in looking at the contents, I'm wondering, are there strategies or suggestions about addressing issues around diversity of number of students as well as faculty in graduate programs, teaching in graduate programs?
Yeah, I think if you look at priority area number 2, high quality and access to education, and goal 1. And so that one, focuses then on sort of student body and faculty. And so it recognizes the fact that, if you want to have a diverse student body, you need to have a diverse faculty.
Just for clarity purpose, I see priority area number 1, we talk about creative activity, and priority area number 3, innovation. How do you distinguish between these two things, like creative activity and innovation?
The creative activity in the first part refers to the humanities and fine arts, where you may not, where it might not be that you write peer-reviewed articles. So it's that sense of creative activity. And the part on efficiency and innovation is like innovative ideas for graduate education, new models of graduate education. So that's kind of the difference.
I have a question about goal 5 on page 29. Talks about highly qualified undergraduate students in graduate programs. Is that highly qualified undergraduate students from Texas or from any? Find this term somewhere, the highly qualified.
So I think, like highly qualified, there are a few different kind of terms that it was sort of decided that that would be left up to the institution and that they would define it perhaps in the context of, where they are. I believe the reason why we have this one is that, while of course we want to have preeminent programs that attract people from all over the state, all over the country and the world, we also know that it's important that we also are attracting students, within the state into our programs. And also perhaps there is some, what I would say, responsibility in the undergraduate programs and, helping to prepare students for graduate programs in general. So I think that's why it particularly is speaking to, just from the, I guess from the state versus, recognizing the fact, of course, that we want to also be able to attract others. So I don't know if is there anything else you want?
Yeah, I think we kind of left it ambiguous on purpose.
Yeah, the idea was basically to try to just get more people in the pipeline, not necessarily from Texas, but just recognizing, I think there's data there that show the small number of undergraduates that go into graduate schools. The idea is just to enhance or increase the vision of career options to make graduate education a viable career option.
Yeah, so I think even in this space, there is opportunity for the creative 3+2s and 4+1 kind of programs. So I think, it really is just sort of saying that, there is a recognition that if we're able to help increase the number of our, residents of the state in getting graduate degrees, that is also a major benefit to the state. So hopefully it won't be perceived as being exclusive of, attracting people from outside.
Karen, I'd like to direct you to page 22 for just a second. And if we look at page 22, what we see there is Table 3, which talks about average loan debt in Texas. And I'll grant you it's a very important issue, but one thing that we should do is include some sort of benchmarking for the U.S. inflation rate. And I just looked it up. During the period from 2005 to 2015, the U.S. inflation rate was 21.36%. As a consequence, if we look at the very first line, for instance, master's degree, that 28,190 would actually be 34,211 in 2015 dollars. Or we could go with the 2015, where we see that 42,867. In 2005 dollars, that would be 35,322. It all revolves around the fact that there was an inflation rate of 21%. So if we look at the master's degree and the percentage change there in real dollar terms, it was approximately 31%.
That's a great point, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
We'll be in touch for your help on that table, okay?
As a faculty member at a university with one of the smaller graduate programs, I want to commend the subcommittee and staff for keeping the document, as you indicated, broad enough to be applicable to every kind of university, from the big flagships down to the regional comprehensives with only 3 doctoral programs. I appreciate that.
Just to follow up on that inflation correction, every place we have dollars versus years, could we do those in constant dollars? Because it's really hard to tell whether there's real growth or not in some of these. The table, on page 11, for instance, there's a lot of numbers, and it would be nice if those were in constant dollars.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dean. Thank you. That's a kind of a global note for this whole report, is to normalize the monetary figures into some kind of constant dollar figure.
Okay. So no additional comments, and of course, feel free to read the document thoroughly, and if you could just send some feedback before the end of the month, it would be greatly appreciated. I think we saw this so many times that, that it's great. Would be great to have some fresh eyes, and perhaps if you see some gaps, but of course, gaps of information supporting, the strategies and the goals and things. Okay, so that said, then we will move on to our first discussion item. And so this topic, I think I guess the staff and others would like some guidance from the GEAC on, how to understand these terms, and I'm sure you probably have discussions about this on your campus. And so this is sort of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And, what are, definitions of these characteristics and maybe, distinctions. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how you sort of view this on your campus and even how you maybe are using those terms.
So to the whole jargon, we've added transdisciplinary as well. So you have two disciplines, A and B. The research happens in between, so you have to develop new knowledge. We call it the interdisciplinary. The multidisciplinary is you have A and B, and both A and B combined works together. The transdisciplinary, we basically looked at it as disciplines A and B, but they need to elevate the level of knowledge and with more impact to the community, so it's a little bit broader. So after all the confusion and the fuzziness on campus, we kind of started to define it at least with our own terminology.
Others want to, and I mean, feel free, of course, also to talk about maybe that terminology in the context of perhaps research and education initiatives or things like that that you might be doing and how you're using it.
So here are some concrete examples that I've recently seen here, just based on what we've received at the coordinating board. Increased interest in interdisciplinary engineering, for instance. We've seen a couple of proposals for that. I've seen a couple of proposals dealing with the interdisciplinary SIP itself, right? SIP 30, which is the interdisciplinary SIP, which is often used now for teacher training programs. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's nothing to do with teacher training. Sometimes it truly is a combination of two or more disciplines working together in a particular direction, whatever that may be. So it would be helpful. Part of this is part of the driver of why we're asking the question, since we're not, on your campuses, involved in the research, involved in teaching these programs to students. It helps us to understand some of these terms and how you're using them. So again, to take a concrete example, what's the difference between an interdisciplinary engineering program and a multidisciplinary engineering? Because we've gotten both kinds of requests. And sometimes it seems to me that we're using those two terms almost interchangeably. Other times, like our UTSA colleague here just said, other times it seems like institutions have a very clear and separate definition for those two terms. So do you think that there is any sort of consensus in the field? That would be helpful for me to know right off the bat.
We've been guided or maybe constrained by the establishment of interdisciplinary as a teacher training discipline. And so on our campus, when we mean interdisciplinary but not teacher training, we use multidisciplinary. Oh. We began as a teacher's college, as did many of us, but that's still a big thrust for us. And so once interdisciplinary was established as a teacher training SIP, then that sort of precluded its use for other purposes. But we've substituted multidisciplinary. We have a division called the Division of Multidisciplinary Studies. So that sometimes is just two disciplines that have combined or that collaborate, but that's what we do.
Okay. That's helpful.
At a health-related institution, the term that's being used and is actually quite a big initiative across the state is interprofessional education, where you've got the multiple professions coming together to have patient care. So we rarely use multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary.
You use the term interprofessional.
At the University of Houston downtown, we have a master's program in nonprofit management that we say is interdisciplinary because we have courses that are in political science, business, technical communication, lots of different disciplines. I would say, though, that it is more multidisciplinary. That is, you have multiple disciplines that contribute to the program. My PhD is in American Studies from University of Minnesota, which is the first interdisciplinary program in the country. And my understanding of interdisciplinary is the understanding of the ways in which multiple disciplines come together intersectionally to produce a particular standpoint of knowledge. And so when you have multiple disciplines that are not necessarily thought of as the way in which they are building intersectionally, then it's multiple disciplinary. But interdisciplinary is that intersection of the disciplines.
So, talking from another health sciences institute, I agree with what was said earlier. We also call it interprofessional. And something very tangentially related that we are working on is global health, where we have public health folks as well as nursing and medicine folks all working together, trying to get kind of a certificate program in that, so many different students from different professions get to interact and learn about each other. So it's very interesting for the students, but we are trying to put that together and struggling with it right now.
Coming from a what I classify as an interdisciplinary field of study, when physics and biology and anatomy came together, kinesiology was born. Motor learning is another subfield of the hard sciences that was born as a means of solving solutions. To me, a multidisciplinary is when all these things are still separate and have their perspective on an issue from separate venues, but a true interdisciplinary program or perhaps innovation, especially at the graduate level, is when two disciplines merge to the point to where they create something brand new. And so when you get so good at what you do that you can see things that have never been seen before, that to me would be the true interdisciplinary approach.
Visually, James, that would be represented by a Venn diagram, right? You'd have three circles that are separate. That's multidisciplinary. Where they intersect is where they're interdisciplinary.
That is a wonderfully simple visual. That's a great metaphor. Thank you.
So go ahead, Dean.
So I think that was a great example, but once it's successful, it's not interdisciplinary anymore, it's a discipline. And because we have to submit and get approval for degree plans, I think by definition, by the time it's a degree, it's no longer interdisciplinary. In fact, it's not even multidisciplinary, it has to be a discipline. Otherwise, we can't get a degree. We have a title in the UT Austin catalog, but if you check the origins of that title, it goes back to the 20s and 30s when UT Austin could grant a degree in anything it wanted, a PhD. There was no coordinating board. The predecessor didn't exist yet. I think that was in the mid-50s, if I remember my history right. And those were truly ad hoc committees that had representatives from many disciplines for a student who wished to pursue a degree in something that did not fit in any discipline. So it was truly inter. It required support from multiple disciplines, but it was really in between disciplines. But we can't do that anymore by definition. So, I think by the time it's successful, it is a discipline. By the time there's a degree, it is a discipline.
And I guess following on that, so I think, like we started this energy master's and we called it an interdisciplinary degree because we were having, I don't know, maybe it's multidisciplinary, but we called it interdisciplinary. And so the intent was the students would actually have all these different modules. Some of them would come from various, STEM, fields, but then also they would include maybe policy and business. And I recall, the group was struggling because when we submitted, we called the coordinating board, it was like, okay, so we don't know what zip code to use. So because, there isn't exactly an energy one. And I think ultimately they picked a zip code, but I think we really weren't quite sure. And we discovered after about the second year of the program, we picked though a zip code. This zip code though does not carry STEM. And so then we had a bunch of students who came from STEM backgrounds, particularly international students, and there are implications about being able to get your your training and stuff like that. And so we actually changed the number. And so I think that is definitely something that, I guess, we could use some guidance on anyway. So how do you sort of decide then if it really is multi or interdisciplinary on, what zip code, what area to go to? Do you sort of try to think about, okay, I'm somewhere in the STEM world, so let me try to, push it under, because Dean is right. In the end, you have to sort of align it to something, right, in order to give it a zip code. And and then I think the other thing I was going to mention was just kind of also supporting what Dean was mentioning. So we also kind of call programs interdisciplinary if they cross multiple colleges, just because that's how we're organized. And so we had material science and engineering, which included science and engineering, okay, and so it was interdisciplinary. But then eventually we decided to make that degree program a department. And so then once we made it a department, then it had to fit under one of the colleges. So now it's under engineering. And so, I think we are sort of in some sense forced to kind of compartmentalize them into something because they need to align with, zip codes and things like that, so.
The structure's set up that way right now, but one of the beauties of doctoral programs is you may start with one zip code and you may actually create another in the end. Some of ours didn't exist, but they have emerged. And so, yes, you always have to align in our current structure. You have to align with somebody, but the creativity can still be there to create something new.
All right, any other feedback? Have we kind of, you think?
Yeah, you've given some interesting definitions, and you've described the concepts, and this has been helpful. Thank you. You've taken some good notes.
So maybe another question though, James. So are there any implications from the coordinating board perspective about that terminology of something, interdisciplinary or not?
Just I guess more as a conceptual model to help us understand the kind of proposals that we're getting these days, because it seems like there's, as opposed to say 15 years ago when I started the coordinating board, there's now an increased interest in multi and interdisciplinary programs, particularly graduate programs. So it just helps us to understand what we're getting from you in terms of requests and help us understand how to review them.
Well, it's probably the case because most societal issues can't be solved by just a single discipline any longer, so that you need individuals who minimally can work with individuals from other disciplines, and you also need individuals who have a broader understanding of not just their own disciplines, but others it connects to, and that's probably why you're seeing that. I'm not entirely surprised. I've always been told, though, that it's more difficult to get an interdisciplinary degree through the coordinating board, and that there is some caution against creating too extravagant interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary programs. Is that the case, or is that just some unfounded rumor?
That may have been more the case in the past when it was newer or more novel. I think now there's it's becoming commonplace enough that I don't think that would be true. I would say it might only be a challenge if there wasn't a clear vision for the program. If people are, if the idea wasn't yet fully formed, then we might notice that. But if you have a good plan for it, we've increasingly seen proposals, not just interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, although we've seen quite a few of those, but also as those merge together and become new fields. We've seen proposals for doctoral programs in fields that just didn't exist before. I'm thinking of, not to name names, but a program, there was a doctorate in clinical laboratory science that was recently proposed and approved, and that, as far as we tell, just about never existed almost anywhere in the country before. It is a challenge for us to stay abreast of how quickly things change and grow and develop. That is certainly, that is always the case because higher education, reinvents itself periodically. But I don't think that multi or interdisciplinary programs face any harder road as long as they have a clear conception of themselves, is what I want to describe it as.
In looking at the data that you provided with this about the number of proposals that are approved, is there a general synopsis that you can provide as to those that are not approved, what some of the issues are that are keeping them from being approved, especially at the doctoral level?
I would want to go through and review before I said anything categorical, but I can tell you that the thing that is probably the easiest to get tripped up on is need. Workforce need, and clearly establishing workforce need. And there can be some challenges to that if it is a new discipline and it's a new field and there isn't much out there to sort of establish the pathway. That makes it more challenging. Doesn't make it impossible at all, but it just makes it a little more challenging. The institution has to be a little more creative in the ways that they investigate and document the workforce need. Dr. Silverman, do you have any comments?
Sure. So there, we see all sorts of things here at the coordinating board. Some denials are, I've seen one that Full Sail said, oh, we're going to do exactly like this other program. So that's what we're going to do. We don't have anything in place yet, but we're going to be just like this other program. I'm not even kidding. We've had proposals that were completely duplicate of a different proposal that we had received from another institution in previous years, and we kind of questioned whether or not the institution really did their due diligence on their own campus and looked at their own needs. So those are a couple of things. We look very closely at cost. Is the institution going to cover its costs with this program? Is there really a student demand for it? Or is this just the aspiration of a couple of faculty members who managed to get this proposal all the way to us? Because it's a long road to get to us. So those are a few things off the top of my head. Certainly, workforce need, demand. Are these graduates going to have a job? Let's face it, we don't need to be spending more and more on education for students, and if they walk out the door, they're not going to be able to be employed. That's a disservice to that student and to the institution, quite frankly. But those are kind of some off the top of my head. I don't know, James,
I think
more examples?
One other might be the unnecessary duplication issue. It might be that you have a great idea for a program, a master's or doctoral program, but the field is already really crowded, and there's a lot of really good, high-quality programs in the state, and perhaps the proposal didn't do a good enough job of establishing what would make this program different or unique or valuable in a way that isn't already covered by some other program. And that's an important part of the role that the coordinating board plays. And it's something that we try to bring forward into the picture, because of course every institution has a good reason for proposing the programs that it wants. And it sees, a market out there, it sees students that it can serve. But our role is to have the big picture view. And you at the institution, you may not be paying much attention sometimes to what the other institutions in the state are doing. We occasionally hear this quite openly, you know. What about all those other programs in the state? Oh, well, that's your problem to worry about, coordinating board people, right? Because your job is to promote your students in your programs in your institutions, and our job is to have that statewide perspective. And you can see it in the coordinating board's legislation. If you look at Chapter 61, where it talks about the basic founding of the coordinating board, what is the coordinating board supposed to do? It's right up there in the beginning. Avoid unnecessary and costly duplication of programs, right? We want good programs, we want high-quality programs, and we want programs that are needed, but we don't want more programs that are actually needed.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I have a question. In thinking about the distinction between multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, does the committee look at how prescriptive a program is? That is, if the disciplines are and the courses in a program are kind of already specified, then you have multiple disciplines, as opposed to being a little more wide open where students can choose kind of across the university or across disciplines, period, in which case it might be more interdisciplinary.
Yeah, I think there is a challenge there, you know, because if it's too wide open, then the concept itself starts to become a little nebulous, right? Greater specificity generally suggests a more clear vision for what this program is and what it could do for students. So I think there's a happy medium there, right? And that's, I think, usually what we're looking for. Certainly to my mind, if I see a proposal for a multi or interdisciplinary program, I do want to see that there's a clear conception of what those disciplines might be. Dr. Silverman?
I'll build on what James is talking about a little bit. We want to make sure that the student has a home. So with that interdisciplinary, if there are too many cooks in the kitchen, nobody's going to claim that meal, or something to that effect. But basically, we want to make sure that the student has a place to go, that the institution knows where that program's located. So if it is a business and an engineering, is it more business or is it more engineering? So we get into those kinds of issues. And it makes it difficult for students. But, you know, should engineering and business work together collaboratively? Of course. And do we want to encourage that? Yes, we do. And as with the health professions, the interdisciplinary stuff or interprofessional, it's wonderful. And it's changing how health professions education is being conducted. So we want to encourage that, but we want to have the student have a home, and we want to have a place where we know to put it in our zip code. You know, quite frankly, that's just administrative.
So let me clarify this for my own self. As chair of a department, I have two sets of classes. One is called risk management, which includes finance and information systems. I think that would be classified as interdisciplinary because it's all within business. Then I have another class and area which is energy finance. Energy finance actually is engineering and all of that goes on, plus the financial end and bookkeeping and all of that. So I would consider that to be multidisciplinary. Is that sort of the understanding that we are going with here?
I think that's certainly internally consistent and coherent. I guess until we as a higher ed community all very clearly agree on what these different terms mean, there may continue to be some confusion, but based on what discussion I've heard today, you know, that sounds consistent with what I've heard.
I'll just add to that one more thing. Again, the distinction between the course level and how you're categorizing that SIP at the course level, and the distinction between the program level. So if that's helpful.
Okay, so I think we sort of stepped a little into 7, so we can transition into that one. And this one is sort of talking about capacity and expansion of graduate programs. And I think it's, kind of trying to get at kind of on your campus, how do you, have these conversations about capacity and expansion? And there's, I guess, 3 tables of data that were provided. And so we've already sort of talked a little bit about one, which is the table on approval of graduate programs. And I thought this was pretty helpful because I guess I didn't know how many were not approved. And so I think that's good to know. And then the next table is a table on the current number of graduate programs. And then lastly, one on graduate student enrollment. Right, which is interesting because I guess it shows we've had a decrease from 16-17 to 17-18 in enrollment. So, okay, so I think I don't know, before we open it up, if James, you have any other thing you want to add to contextualize sort of the input and discussion.
This is an important issue that you'll see covered in the RAND report. It's one of the major topics that they were asked to consider and provide some data and recommendations on. So especially, again, for you new members, I'd encourage you to go and read through the RAND report. The whole thing, if you have time, but certainly the executive summary is quite valuable and not too lengthy. And that link is available on our website under the reports section. If you have trouble finding it, just email me or Jen, and we can help you out with a link. But this issue of capacity and expansion of graduate programs is ongoing, partially because it's not always easy to nail down. It's not easy for you folks at any particular one institution to know at a glance what the other programs in the state are doing, particularly if there's a lot of them. If you're talking engineering or education programs, wow, that's a lot of territory to cover. So it's kind of hard to know what everyone is doing out there. But at the same time, that's our obligation to take that perspective into account, to know, okay, you want to have a program in, I'll pick an area, education. There's a lot of doctoral and master's education programs out there. So if you're proposing one, you should have a clear sense of what's going on in your region and in the state as a whole, and what particular segment of that market are you going to be appealing to, that student market. Are you going to appeal to the working professionals? Are you going to appeal to students coming up through the pipeline? What's your idea? Hearing your perspective about how you view capacity expansion. When you're considering, for instance, one of your departments comes to you and they've got an idea for a new master's or doctoral program in an area where you didn't have it before, how do you look at the field? How do you try to decide what the capacity is? And are the students out there being served right now, or is there room for you to serve some more students that aren't being currently served? And how do you determine that?
Well, first, I think this is just an excellent discussion. At Texas A&M Kingsville, our MBA program actually has doubled in the last 2 years. It is just off the board. I ran out of faculty. Some of my faculty are teaching 2 overloads just to try to cover what's going on. And so we're in the midst now of trying to create programs within the MBA to try to service everybody that's coming to our MBA program. And so we needed a new one in accounting and a new one in finance just to try to service everybody that's coming through the door. Well, it's an online program, so it's servicing them online. Thank you.
In biomedical PhD programs, the capacity is relatively easy to determine by the funding that's available to support the graduate students. So we survey our faculty every year, we look at our research expenditures, and we look at whether our students have any issues getting placement when they choose a laboratory. And so that's how we determine capacity.
Dean?
So, putting it in the context from our other document about both student debt and recruiting the best students. The question we have to ask is, can you support the students? And is the support you provide them competitive? And in fact, will a student choose to go to your program as opposed to another university? So, we're very concerned about student support. I'd say that it's sort of like the biomed. The determining factor is how many can you support? And we're going back and looking at all our programs with that in mind, regardless of field. Because we've just finished, I think we're about to do our last program review. So we've been doing them now for 7 years, and we're now through our 100th program review, give or take. And that's one of the big questions I always get asked is, how do you support your students? How much do you pay them? Is it competitive? Cost of living in Austin is skyrocketed. Housing is a nightmare. It's occasionally limited by how many students faculty can deal with, but it's more likely to be related to how much money are we going to try to provide those students. That ties into student debt. If we don't provide them anything, their student debt goes up.
So resources, especially financial resources, I hear both of you saying, are a key, if not the key, determining factor.
And I think the last campus climate study we did for our graduate students, I think that one of the top things on their list was financial instability. And I think there's a big correlation to failure to complete and money.
So what about in the context of master's programs? So I think we probably both are talking about doctoral programs, right, where clearly people support the students. But what about thinking about it in the context of students that you're not supporting, which maybe some standalone master's programs, professional masters?
We look at, besides just the need, establishing the need in the area and nationally, depending on the program, it really is, what are we going to do differently that's not done already? And because a lot of our master programs are in fields that are very well represented already. So what is it that's going to make this program a program that's going to attract students? We don't have necessarily the scholarship resources and the financial resources maybe that other institutions have. So what's going to be different about this? So we're not just putting out a program, that there's other programs that can suit students' needs.
So you're really talking about sort of a curricular emphasis or focus that would allow you to distinguish your program from other similar programs in the same discipline.
Correct.
We do the same thing, but we also, because we are in a system in which 3 of our institutions are really close together, then we have conversations with our counterparts at UH Maine or Clear Lake to see how we can be different, but also I think kind of working in a collegial manner so that we know that each of the programs are serving our students. We serve a different population of students or have different curricular approaches and emphases that will offer something different to, the plethora of students in the Houston area.
And I think for master's programs, fundability, what kind of resources are available for master's students is also an important factor on our campus anyway, and also a discussion of is there workforce need and what kind of earning potentials do students have when they graduate, so that if there are student loans, if there's student debt, will they be able to get out of it and a reasonable time frame because of the earning potential that they have with that degree. So I think that does make a difference on our campus as well.
I think this is an interesting time to also go back to our earlier conversation about interdisciplinary and how a research area that may be very attractive to students, can be developed into a certificate or master's program, and then as how that research area becomes an academic area, I guess, is the bigger question. So tying our initial conversation about interdisciplinary and interdisciplinary research areas and interdisciplinary education, how does student interest in these research areas? I mean, I think a lot of, for example, science and engineering is done at the interface of different disciplines, and so how does that research get converted into a academic program? And I've seen some of these programs become very popular, and sometimes from the lower level. So a interdisciplinary certificate that's very popular, and then an interdisciplinary master's degree, and then an interdisciplinary PhD.
The other thing is that our master's programs are professional masters, so in addition to looking at workforce need and career opportunities in developing programs, then we have conversations with potential employers to find out what are the competencies and skill sets that they might be looking for in a particular sector, and we're cognizant of that as we're developing the curriculum.
I guess our online programs kind of come into this conversation also, right? Because I think many of us are now also having to make decisions of whether or not a program might be face-to-face or online or perhaps both, and I think it's, trying to see whether or not there is a demand. Perhaps, I think for the online ones, there's a demand that maybe is, can be served outside of your campus. I think, for us, we think that some of our graduates might like to have a master's, from our university, but they live in Dallas or they live, some other place, and so that's, I think, one driver is that you feel like there is a demand perhaps outside of your local area and their ability to be able to come and do it face to face.
And Karen, related to that is how many students can you put into an online class as opposed to a face-to-face class? I actually can put more people into a face-to-face class than an online class. So that's a capacity limitation. The other one is simply, if you have any accounting faculty that are looking to move, I can use them. I am so short. Finance too. There's just not the PhDs out there. If I had those, we could expand programs tomorrow.
Some of the discussions we're having on campus, which is pretty difficult, is also to talk about the life cycle of a program. So what should be the life of a program? Because it's basically a portfolio issue, so you can cannibalize your existing programs by throwing in a new program in there. And so part of it is at what level you want to build this undergraduate, certificate, master, PhD type of a pipeline, and actually just communicate the need to the students. Sometimes the students are not aware of that, but then when you start building those different programs and they have these connections at the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary level, you get two different groups of faculty members just going against each other, and that's a very difficult thing in an academic environment. So my background is in industrial engineering, so I look at this as a product development. But when you bring all faculty members with very specific discipline knowledge kind of around the table, they don't think outside the box. So that's a very big, difficult situation. I don't know how others are communicating these kind of things. Especially, we have a pretty broad graduate council that we're trying to restructure. Everybody, it's more of a compliance type group. Anytime you use the word, for instance, management in a part of a paragraph, if you're a College of Engineering faculty, the College of Business folks may just say, oh, you know, that word belongs to us, type of thing. So I don't know what your experience is when you're thinking about program development.
Well, on our campus, new program development is very much part of the strategic planning of the university. So if a program is not on the department's strategic plan, on the college's strategic plan, on the provost's strategic plan, it will not move forward. So it's a very structured process that happens from the bottom up and also simultaneously somewhat top down, so that it's pretty clear what kind of programs we might be going with, and on our campus then the money follows the program, so that if the provost decides to move forward with or the president decides to go forward with a particular program, money will be set aside for that program. So it is very clear when that program is established that it will be funded, and not yes, we have this program and now see what you're going to do. So I think that's something that we're taking quite seriously. I've never been anywhere where the strategic plan was actually a living document before coming to Texas State. So it's refreshing.
That's great.
Just
and that,
another question, sorry, regarding the financial support that we were talking about. It differs from profession to profession, right? Like from medicine to nursing to graduate school. How is it actually determined, and who actually influences those decisions?
in terms of levels of financial support for students?
Yeah.
Well, I would think that your own disciplines tend to kind of establish norms for what students get paid, at least on a state by state basis. I mean, there's variation within the institutions. I can say that from a coordinating board perspective, student support is a really important issue, and that's one of the areas where if say we get a proposal, we're reviewing your proposal, and we notice that the level of student support proposed for this program is out of line with what other well-regarded programs in the state tend to offer, we'll usually go back to the institution and ask, why is your student support so low? Why isn't it in line with what your peer institutions are doing? So that's something that we do drill down into quite a bit. It speaks to the student debt goal of 60 by 30 techs, but it also speaks, I think, pretty clearly to the quality of the program, right? That people react to money in academia just like they do everywhere else. It still attracts them, and you can have a hard time getting the best students if your compensation package is not in line.
And also the setting of the institution also really matters for the type of students that we're getting, right? When you're starting as a new school and you're coming from without a no-name kind of stuff, like in a border city or something, that also influences the kind of students that we get, and what kind of support that they need to get.
Yeah, my observation is that a new program, especially in a big discipline, a discipline meaning that has a lot of visibility, public visibility, in which there are a number of other prominent programs in the state, new programs will often be quite generous as a way of attracting students. I can think of a couple of professional programs that have been recently approved here at the coordinating board, and a big donor covered, tuition for the entire first cohort of students as a way of drawing them in.
Thank you, Karen. So James, I know you've alluded to the RAND report a couple times, and so in the context of this question, I know Andrea had talked and others have talked about new programs, and I know that in the RAND report there's a lot of really good information, and you've heard me say this also. There's also some omissions, serious omissions, and some erroneous conclusions. And some of those omissions and erroneous conclusions have to do with where to put graduate students in the future of the state of Texas. For example, when law schools across the country are closing and reducing the number of seats, and one of the conclusions is law is going to be one of the fast growing areas in Texas, I worry, about the validity and the veracity of that analysis. The other thing is that the RAND report misses, of course, the fact that there may be jobs created as a result of research and graduate education that don't yet exist, and the contribution that has to the workforce is unknown quantity. But I know when we review new programs, you've often told us that you look at workforce projections and so on, and a lot of the litmus test has to do with what the contribution is to Texas. Well, the simple fact of the matter is it may be that we need to look at a broader workforce than just the state of Texas. Well, certainly the goal is to increase the economy of the state. We probably will be a net exporter of students for some time, right? And it's no accident that California and New York have the largest economies in the country. I think California is the fourth largest economy in the world. And that is because what? They have some of the best and well-developed university systems and the largest graduate enterprises. So as we think about this, what contributes to, or what are the factors contributing to capacity expansion, we need to think about the broader context of what that means to the economy, not just of Texas, but to the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. That point is well taken. That's one of the reasons we look at both national and state and regional workforce needs, especially when we're looking at doctoral programs, because we recognize that doctoral programs play on a national stage, not just a regional or state stage.
So, following up on the Mark, kind of pulling out some things from the RAND report, I think I recall that there was maybe a recommendation. I don't know if it rose to the level of sort of being on the final recommendation list, but I know for sure it's in the section about perhaps something related to market research and, maybe the coordinating board or the state or something like that, sort of providing some resources for programs in relation to that?
So what we've done recently is the agency purchased a subscription, I guess you'd call it, to Burning Glass, right? Wasn't that the one? Which one? MC, that's right. Okay, there are two competing products, and MC is the one that we decided to go with. I think we have 3 or 4 use licenses for here in the agency. Yeah, Jen is one, so I'll let her talk. She probably knows more about this than I do.
About using it?
Well, that we're basically looking at how useful it is. We've been sort of piloting it in our own efforts, and
yeah. So with graduate program proposals, we've been using it to. You can get down into zip code information for employment, salaries, and then zoom out to sort of broad trends as well. And the MC as a product or a service itself has continued to evolve some of the features on it. So we're exploring some of those this fall as well for how that helps with understanding not only sort of a one-to-one connection of discipline and industry, but then also, as I was hearing discussed already this morning, sort of creative connections or anticipating where these students or the research could be going in the future and connectivity across industries. So we've been using it to sort of contextualize and get a better understanding, especially I'm not a subject matter expert in all of the different disciplines I get to look at, but that sort of helps frame and contextualize. So we'll continue to use that and sort of see how helpful that is for understanding the fields and anticipating the future.
And I hope once we've built up a base of experience that then we can make some sort of recommendation to you about the usefulness of such tools and whether your systems or institutions should consider purchasing them. That they're certainly not cheap. These tools have a cost to them. So that's one of the reasons we only have a few licenses here in the agency. So it's something you'd want to carefully consider because it certainly is an investment. Dr. Silverman or Peoples, do either of you have a comment about these? There's a...
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we also depend on the institutions when you submit proposals for new graduate programs, or really for any program for that matter. But we also depend on you to help us with this whole issue of demand, either for now or in the future, because you may have access to information and data from professional organizations or associations. and that kind of thing that helps shed some light on this. And so anything you can else beyond the sort of normal, if you will, workforce data that we get from TWC and BLS, but also from MC, that you could provide is always real helpful to us in looking at that. So just keep that in mind as well.
I think during my time here at the coordinating board over the past 15 years, we've seen the assessment of workforce need and capacity to just become more and more complex. For instance, now, institutions might not just have a program. So let's say that we're looking at a program, someone wants to have a new doctoral program in, say, educational leadership. Well, in the past, we would just go around and say, okay, well, who's got other educational leadership programs? Where are they located around the state? What's their enrollment? How many people do they graduate each year? And these kind of simple factual examinations. But now we have to look at these same institutions may have a face-to-face version and an online version, and each of those has different capacities and perhaps has a different student base. One is local and regional, and the other one's state or nationwide. We have and because of that increasing online presence, then there's also competition from outside the state coming into the state offering similar programs. So our challenge to correctly assess not just how much need is out there, but how much existing capacity out there has gotten increasingly complex. And it has led to a question I've heard voiced in different fora, including in board meetings, which is, how many is enough? How many are too many? That's an honest question. It's not easy to assess anymore. When compared to back in the days when every program was at a brick and mortar institution and you knew exactly what the capacity was, and it was all determined by how much classroom space and how many faculty you had and how much student support you had, and these other pretty simple one-to-one sort of relationships.
Well, sort of combining those two thoughts, Rex's and James's there, does MC actually forecast needs? Do they give you ideas of what the demand will be 10 years from now then?
There's some linkages with BLS projections and employment projections as well in there. So there's crosswalking that can happen with SOC codes, CIP codes, and industry characteristics, as well as it does projections. So it does historical and some projection with job postings and characteristics within them. So you could do some keywords if you're looking at something that was inter or multidisciplinary and you looked at some of the terminology that's put in there to see a broad range of fields. Like one of the things to think about is that you could have an accounting degree, but you're working in food service because you're working at HEB headquarters, and so you would come up as a food service employee, but not, right? And so you need to sort of think holistically about the different variables you're entering into that, but it's got a lot of great features and visualizations as well. So, yeah.
Dean?
I was looking back at our draft and numbers we have in there. Globally, we came up with 31% graduate enrollment increase from 07-08 to 16-17. 57% in the number of master's degrees awarded. And then later on, we've got the table showing average loan debt. And in another table, we have some vague measure of institutional support. I think that one is in research and development. But if we look at the number of people and we look at the amount of support, if the support has not gone up at the same rate as people, then it seems pretty clear that the debt per person is probably going up, and that might be this number. So not only is the average debt gone up, the number of people in debt have gone up. We're assuming that the market supports these big expansions, and those people are going to go out and get jobs that pay that back. But I don't know where we get that data either. And if there's a 5-year lag in the system that these people are still coming in self-supported, building up a large amount of debt and getting their masters, and industry has started to move, or employers have started to move away, and we don't know that for 5 years. That lag in the system, in that feedback loop, is going to cost a lot of people a lot of money.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, Dean, think about the U.S. government. We are now in 2018, right? So we're basically using census data that's 8 years old. So if you're only 5 years behind, you're actually doing better than the U.S. government.
Yeah, and the tracking of master's graduates is an important and upcoming, I think, up-and-coming issue. It was a strong recommendation out of the RAND report. They recommended that programs do more to track the employment of their graduates after graduation. I'd also mention that just based on my own experience with your graduate program reviews, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a master's program where one of the significant recommendations of the external reviewers that you hired was, hey, why aren't you tracking your master's graduates? How do you know how well your program is doing if you're not tracking your graduates, is what they keep asking. That's something that I think as higher education moves further and further along in this century, it seems like there's a greater and greater demand for different metrics of performance, and that's certainly one of the ones that keeps coming up.
It's also going to be very expensive to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that would be a good conversation to talk about some best practices. I mean, the masters, they change so often. And then just the number, you know, most of us are graduating more masters than doctoral, right? And so just trying to keep track of that data is going to be very hard for the masters. I mean, it's hard for the doctoral, but even for the masters, I don't know how.
At UT Austin, about, when did we finish? 4 or 5 years ago, we went back and checked 600,000 student records. So everybody who's been through UT Austin since 1989. And we had a bunch of people on the payroll whose jobs were to go out and use social media and assorted other places to try to run down where these people are in terms of employment. And it was a very expensive activity, and it was very hard. And that, let's see, the 600,000, that was not undergraduate records, that's our graduate records. So a lot of people, and the yield on that is hard to measure, whether both finding information, the veracity of that information, and trying to figure out whether it was good for anything. We did it, but it was hard. And basically now we have a database system where I can look up every student, every graduate student out of 600,000 people by name if I wanted to. But I'm not really sure what I can do with that.
Right, because you're not necessarily sure of the veracity of any particular data record, is what you're saying.
Right, well, especially, the academic part of the record, we're sure of the veracity of that.
Yeah.
But what did they do upon graduation? What did they do 5 or 10 or 15 years ago? Because we're going back to 89. So some of these people have gone a long time. And then trying to attach that to what they got their degree in is very challenging as well.
It's probably changed twice since then.
It's probably changed 5 times. Right.
Yeah. Now our agency does have some ability to track students who are employed within Texas. Because of TWC records, my understanding is that we have a pretty reliable means of discovering if graduates are employed in Texas. But yeah, once they leave the state, that capacity to determine where they're employed, if they're employed, who they're employed with, what their first year earnings might be, that becomes a lot more challenging.
Okay, any more comments on this topic?
We're a really small private school, so this isn't really an option for us financially. But I notice the push more and more for items such as portfolios that go with students, graduates forever, supposedly. Are you, as larger institutions, considering those as a means of tracking graduates?
So how are you using the portfolio? How might you use it to track?
Are institutions buying those services? That's my question. Because like Portfolium is just one of the vendors that calls on a daily basis. But, you know, the idea is that a student or a graduate can continually update and people can search for them, and it will have a direct link into the LinkedIn if they so create, so that they can show their artifacts of work. And that continues supposedly for the rest of their career. I just wondered if any of y'all were investing in that. So y'all, okay.
We participate, and we're not doing that, but we participated probably now it's maybe 6 or 7 years ago in an initiative that kind of came under this ORCID ID umbrella, and so they had a project. I guess they had gotten maybe some foundation money, and people could, write programs. Well, yeah, do projects that might sort of talk about utilizing and integrating ORCID IDs into some aspect. And so we partnered with our library, and our idea was that we would issue every graduate student an ORCID ID in their first semester. And we would promote the utilization of that ORCID ID with the hope that when they graduated, they might continue, to utilize it. And we would have that ORCID ID in our database, associated with the student, right? And so what we found, after, I guess, a few years is that we were minting, that's what they call it when you issue it, we were minting a lot of ORCID IDs that were not ever being activated, and they were not happy about that. So we had to kind of change our approach. And so what we do now is we, are still kind of promoting the utilization of it, but the students have to kind of opt in to it. But for students who do masters and dissertations, we sort of require that they get one, because we actually, we take their thesis and dissertation document and we issue, an ID number for that document, and it gets associated, with theirs, ORCID ID. But the point is, after they graduate, they may not utilize it. But I think, that is sort of one type of way that really you could, really keep track of it, because the students can actually, you can go in as a user and you could decide to allow people to essentially push, to the record. And so, if they were publishing, right, it could automatically push their documents to it, but then they could also update things in it, kind of like they do a LinkedIn or something like that. And I think, that was sort of something that we tried, and I don't think that we've given up on that, because we are, we still are, we want to, kind of like UT, we want to try to find all of our doctoral graduates, and we want to keep them in a database forever, right? And so I think we have to have some kind of way that is not labor intensive to do that. And so I think, if we could somehow get students to sign on to utilization of something that automatically would push, information that we could then pull, that would be a way to kind of keep up with their permanent employment. But as you know, people like different apps, right? As an example, like some people use WhatsApp, when some people use, GroupMe. So trying to probably get them to agree to utilize one is probably going to be very challenging. But I think that has some possible.
So it serves as a repository and extends beyond graduation? Okay.
It's like Google Scholar or any of those others somewhat, but it has this unique ID, whereas I think with Google Scholar is not quite the same. Yeah.
We haven't used anything institution-wide. Right now, one of our colleges, I think, has decided on Portfolium. They've spent maybe a year looking at all the different services out there. And basically, that's one of the reasons. And the other reason is a lot of the way we were keeping data was really homemade, homegrown systems that we've just outgrown. And the goal is, and this college has undergrad through doctoral, is to use it through, and hopefully, because there are ways to see where our graduates are afterwards, according to Portfolio, use it in this way as well. We have not started it yet, but it is on the horizon for one of the colleges in the university.
Okay, so then I guess we can, well, we can move on. Maybe we have to move on to our other topic. I think we have lunch next on the, but I'm not sure if lunch is here yet. Right, it's not? Okay, so we will move on then to agenda item number 9. And that's so probably, I think we'll have to break and then come back to it, because I just would imagine this might be a really in-depth conversation. And so this is talking about student support, characteristics and considerations, and I think we've had a little bit of alluding to this, and so there's a lot of nuance to this. And so hopefully we can have some really rich discussions, because I think, you know, we might want to talk about this in the context of perhaps the level of the program, so master's versus doctoral. We could also talk about this in terms of, you know, certain kinds of disciplines that are maybe externally funded and ones that are internally funded. And then within that, sort of different subgroups, so underrepresented, historically underrepresented groups, international students. And so I think there's a lot of nuances that we could talk about, you know, this. So maybe we will just open it up and see who wants to sort of start the conversation. But I guess, I don't know, James, if there's also anything else you want to contextualize, so you make sure that you get some feedback on.
You know, we're particularly just interested in hearing your, how do you, for instance, yeah, here's some sample question, like, you know, how do you calculate what is the best level or the appropriate level of support?
What we can afford.
Yeah, what you can afford, sure. But given that resources can be shifted around, do you also think, okay, well, what those institutions or programs that I see as my peers or competitors, depending on how you want to look at it, do I take a sneak peek and see what they're offering, and maybe I'll just add $100 onto what their total is, or so, you know, so how do you make calculations like that?
So for doctoral programs, we certainly are looking at what other institutions are paying, and then we always have to figure in that we can't give tuition waivers like so many other states do, and then we try to find a way, at least for doctoral programs, to have some additional funds in there, taking into consideration that our students have to pay tuition. But I would say that the lack of tuition waiver is the #1 reason why we lose students constantly to out-of-state institutions.
We have a similar situation at UTSA. The discussion is always, how do we, what is the amount and the timing of communication with the graduate students? So we have several formal competitive scholarships. If they apply, if they're eligible, and if you have a committee and go through all that, and if they have a certain amount, then they become in-state eligible, so at least that amount goes down. But from college to college, from discipline to discipline, we have various different rates, and it's pretty much a mess. I don't think it's a technical term, but it's it is what it is, yes.
I'm sure many of us are familiar with the Oklahoma study, so that's what we use at UNT, and then we adjust it appropriately.
Okay. So you have an actual financial study that includes, like, I'm sorry, you have an actual financial study that includes like cost of living factors and things like that?
Well, for every discipline, they have suggested range of salary, of stipends and that kind of thing. So
Okay, and that suggested range, do you know what the basis for that is?
it's based on a survey of several institutions. It's
Okay.
called the Oklahoma Survey, Oklahoma Study.
Great, thank
Dolores?
Is the Oklahoma State Survey.
Yes,
I think
yes.
what you're talking about. It's based on some 50, 60 universities from across the nation, and they do give you disciplinary ranges. Some, you have to be careful with what you look at, though. Sometimes the sample size is 1, And when you find that one person is making $60,000 a year, you begin to wonder, what does this mean? So, I mean, but it's been very useful to us as well, and I recommend it heartily. If you're looking for sort of a national basis on which to judge what you're paying your students, it gives you at least a ballpark idea.
Just to throw in another angle to the question is we also have sometimes very ambiguous ways to decide on the fringe benefits, the stipend, the HR appointment, whether we appoint somebody hourly so that they fill out timesheets. Then all the bureaucracy comes in and they're asked to actually fill out timesheets, and which is like as if research happens only 40 hours a week. So we have those kind of discussions on campus. I don't know if any other campuses have these kind of issues.
Dolores, sorry.
The cost of living is also taken into consideration in that, because, you know, as he was talking about, cost of living is skyrocketed in Austin, and then compared to another city in Texas, it might just not be the same kind of comparisons when you're looking at these kind of.
No, the study doesn't take cost of living into account. They issue it every couple of years. They do one on faculty salaries as well. So it's a useful tool, but it's not your final solution.
Okay, Dolores. Go ahead.
At the University of Houston downtown, we, because we, cannot offer tuition waivers and have professional master's programs, so we've developed a way of calculating a stipend that would account for the full tuition, as well as try to account for the taxes that students would be deducted. And we've offered some TAs in that way, but also because our students, and particularly some of our programs, our students are full-time working, then we've developed scholarships for those students. And the students are more likely to apply for the scholarships than for the TA-ships.
That's interesting. So you make sure that for certain programs that for the working students in those programs, that there are scholarships that can assist them. And I note that because so much of our usual graduate student support revolves around the student working for us in some capacity as a research assistant or a teaching assistant or something like that. And given that working students, people working full-time jobs, don't really necessarily have the capacity for additional employment, that you're just going to provide them with some actual direct financial support.
I think that's quite common on campuses, to offer scholarships to offset the cost, because otherwise you would also not be able to attract the working adults.
Dean.
The University of California system has in their system-wide rules for professional programs, self-supported professional programs, mandatory set-aside for financial aid. There's a percentage number stated that out of the tuition revenues that a program generates, they must set aside, and I've forgotten what the number is, specifically for financial aid, for people in their self-supported Option 3 programs. I actually think that the access issue is a very serious question. We talk about diversity and access. If your master's program is high tuition, and you don't have financial aid, then you're essentially like a high-cost private, but most of the high-cost privates don't charge most of their people full tuition because they set aside a lot of money for financial aid. So it is interesting, the UC system requires that as part of their legislation on if you want one, you have to do it.
We have set aside as well, but we do that on top of our set aside. So we have a 15% set aside, but then we also award on top of the 15%.
Oh, okay, so lunch is here, and I don't know, it says here that I have to take a motion for lunch?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a motion for lunch, that we take break now for lunch. Okay, all right.
Sorry, I'm against lunch.
You want to continue working, huh? Okay, is there a second? All right, okay. All those in favor? All right, okay. Okay.
Okay, so if you've ordered lunch, there's a box lunch with your name on it over there. If you weren't